There are legends that weave themselves into the very fabric of history, hidden beneath layers of dust and time, waiting to be uncovered. The Cursed Crown of Europe is one such legend, a tale so dark, so shocking, it has remained buried for centuries. A crown once thought to be the symbol of power, wealth, and divine right became a curse upon those who wore it. But who could have known the true cost of such ambition? This is a story that begins long before the crowns of kings were merely ornamental, when they were the very keys to the fate of empires. It is a tale that intertwines power, betrayal, and the blood of the innocent, tragedies that would echo through generations. If you're curious about the mysterious and hidden history of European royalty, subscribe to History 1 now and prepare to hear secrets that have remained hidden for centuries. The full truth is more terrifying than you could ever imagine. It was in the year 1203 that the cursed crown was first forged, crafted in the fires of ambition and deceit. It was not merely a symbol of kingship. It was a weapon of unparalleled power, said to grant divine favor to its wearer. The crown was designed by one of the most skilled smiths in the kingdom of Aquitaine, under the commission of King Raoul III, a ruler whose thirst for power was unrivaled. But little did he know, in the forging of this magnificent object, he had also created his own doom. The crown was made of the finest gold, adorned with sapphires, emeralds, and diamonds that caught the light like fire. Its weight was said to be both physical and metaphysical, for it was rumored to have been blessed or cursed by a mysterious sorceress who had been called upon to protect the kingdom. The rumors surrounding the sorceress were as chilling as the crown itself. She was said to have known forbidden magic, rituals older than time itself, and whispered that the crown would carry with it the anger of the gods. Yet the king was blind to such warnings. He believed only in the power the crown would bestow. Raoul III was a king obsessed with immortality, not just in the literal sense, but in the sense of history. He sought to carve his name into the annals of time. It was not enough to rule. He wanted to become a legend. The cursed crown, in his mind, was the final key to securing his place in history. However, as soon as the crown was placed upon his head, something changed in the air. It was as if a shiver passed through the very earth, and an ominous wind whispered through the corridors of his castle. Raoul himself felt it, an undeniable presence, a force that seemed to have entered the very halls of his kingdom. At first, he dismissed it as superstition, but soon things began to unravel. The first sign of the crown's curse came only weeks after Raoul donned it. His most trusted knight, Sir Aldrich, a man who had stood by the king's side through countless battles, was found dead, his body lying in the royal gardens, his face twisted in an expression of sheer terror. No wounds were visible, no sign of struggle. It was as if he had died of sheer fright. But that was only the beginning. The months that followed saw one tragedy after another. Each of Raoul's closest allies died mysteriously. His youngest son, Prince Etienne, succumbed to a sudden illness that no doctor could explain. His wife, Queen Isabel, fell into a deep, unshakable madness. Even the kingdom itself seemed to fall into a decline, with the crops failing and disease spreading. Raoul, desperate to understand what was happening, turned to the very sorceress who had blessed the crown. But when she came to him, she was not the woman he had known. She was a shadow of her former self, her eyes hollow, her skin pale. Her presence sent a chill through the room. She confessed, in a voice that barely reached above a whisper, that the crown was never meant for a mortal ruler. It was forged in blood, a sacrifice made long ago, and one that had bound the spirits of the damned to its power. Raoul, in his desperation, tried to rid himself of the crown, but it was too late. The more he tried to remove it, the tighter it seemed to bind itself to his head. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it had become a part of him. The curse had already set its roots, and there was no escaping it. As King Raoul III's grip on his sanity began to loosen, the weight of the cursed crown grew heavier. His once vibrant kingdom, known for its prosperity and beauty, now stood on the brink of ruin. The skies above Aquitaine darkened, as if the heavens themselves were in mourning. Rumors spread like wildfire across the land, with whispers of the king's descent into madness. But the truth was far darker than anyone could imagine. Desperate for answers, Raoul sought counsel from a distant relative, Countess Edwina, a woman known for her keen intellect and strange affinity with the occult. She had spent her youth studying ancient texts and practicing forbidden arts in secrecy. Perhaps, Raoul thought, she could help him lift the curse that had now consumed his life. Countess Edwina arrived at the king's court, her presence commanding the attention of all who were present. Her dark, raven-like eyes scanned the king, her expression unreadable. Without a word, she walked toward him and placed her hand on his forehead, sensing the magic that had ensnared him. "Raoul, you've done what no man should ever do," she said softly, her voice laced with sorrow. "The crown you wear was not forged for human hands, but for something darker, something beyond the mortal realm. The curse has woven itself into your soul, and it will take more than blood to undo it." Raoul, his eyes wild with fear, pleaded with her to help him. But Edwina's face remained somber, and she spoke the words that would change everything. "You cannot escape it. The crown has claimed you as its own." She explained that the crown was not merely an artifact of power, but a vessel of malice, forged with the souls of those who had died in agony. These souls, trapped within the crown, could not rest. They needed a vessel to carry out their vengeance. And King Raoul, driven by his lust for immortality, had become that vessel. As Raoul listened, he began to understand the true cost of his ambition. The crown had not brought him the eternal glory he had dreamed of. It had brought him nothing but torment. And yet, there was no turning back. The crown could not be removed. It was part of him now. The curse, however, did not stop at the king. As the years passed, the royal family became more and more twisted by the crown's influence. Those who came into contact with it were either driven to madness or death. Queen Isabel, once a gentle and wise woman, had become a mere shell of herself. Her once beautiful face was now hollow, her mind shattered by the constant whispers that came from the crown. Raoul's other children, too, met untimely deaths. His second son, Prince Alistair, had been killed in a mysterious accident. His body found at the foot of a cliff, with no clear explanation as to how he had fallen. His daughter, Princess Celine, was said to have died of a broken heart, her fiancé having vanished under strange circumstances just days before their wedding. But the most chilling tale was that of Raoul's youngest child, little Princess Alara. She had been born shortly before the crown was forged, and from the moment she was born, it seemed that the curse had claimed her as well. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, had turned a cold, unnatural shade of blue. Her laughter, once innocent and joyful, had become a haunting sound that echoed through the halls of the palace. One night, during a particularly violent storm, the royal family gathered in the great hall of their castle. Raoul sat at the head of the table, the cursed crown resting on his brow, his eyes wild with the insanity that had taken hold of him. Suddenly, Princess Alara spoke in a voice that was not her own, an ancient, guttural voice that sent shivers down the spines of all who heard it. "Your family has been cursed from the beginning," she said. "The crown was never meant for you, Raoul. You were a pawn in a game that you could never win. Your blood is the price of your ambition." In that moment, the truth became clear to Raoul. The curse had not just claimed him. It had claimed his entire family, his kingdom, and perhaps even the very soul of Europe itself. The storm outside raged with increasing ferocity, its winds howling like the anguished souls that had been trapped within the crown. The once proud royal family, now little more than shadows of their former selves, sat frozen in the great hall, their eyes locked on Princess Alara. Her voice, that deep, otherworldly tone, sent ripples of dread through the room. The curse had manifested itself in her, a living conduit for the malevolent spirits bound to the crown. Raoul, now consumed with desperation, turned to Countess Edwina. "You must save her," he pleaded, his voice hoarse with a mixture of fear and guilt. "I can no longer bear to see my family destroyed. How do I free her from this evil?" Edwina stood still, her expression unyielding. Her gaze shifted from the princess to Raoul, her eyes softening with sorrow. "There is no freeing her," she whispered. "Once the crown claims a soul, there is no return. The curse was not meant to be undone. It was meant to consume, to destroy, to spread its darkness across generations." Raoul's heart sank, his hands trembling as he grasped the armrests of his throne. The weight of his own decisions was too much to bear. The crown that had promised him power, the legacy of his reign, had instead been a vessel for suffering. Every soul it had claimed, every life it had ruined, was etched into the history of his family. He had thought he was invincible, but he was only a fool. The princess, still in her trance, continued to speak in that unnatural voice. "Raoul," she said, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim candlelight, "you are the last of your line, the last of those who dared wear the crown. And when you fall, so will your kingdom. The curse will spread across Europe, across the world. It cannot be stopped." As the words left her lips, an eerie silence filled the room. The wind outside ceased, and for a moment, it seemed as though time itself had frozen. Raoul's thoughts raced, the horrifying realization sinking in that his kingdom, his bloodline, was doomed. And yet, there was something more. A final bitter truth. The crown had been forged not just for power, but for the preservation of a terrible secret, one that had been buried deep beneath the surface of European history. A secret that few had known and fewer still had dared to speak of. The crown was not merely a symbol of authority. It was a key to an ancient door, one that led to the very foundations of the royal bloodlines of Europe. The kings and queens of old had known of this power, had guarded it with their lives, but over time, the true purpose of the crown had been forgotten, buried beneath the weight of time and ambition. Raoul's family, like many before them, had unknowingly inherited the curse that came with it. Countess Edwina, understanding the depth of the king's despair, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. The crown was never meant to be worn. It was forged to contain the ancient bloodlines, the cursed bloodlines, of the most powerful families in Europe. It was meant to keep the secret buried, to prevent those who wore it from unlocking the dark truth that lies within their ancestry. But in your greed, Raoul, you have undone centuries of protection. Raoul's mind reeled. The truth was more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The crown was not just a source of power. It was a prison designed to keep the dark legacy of the royal families from surfacing. Each ruler who had worn it had unknowingly awakened a terrible force, one that had lain dormant for centuries. But Raoul, with his insatiable thirst for glory, had unwittingly released it. And now, there was no turning back. But what was this secret? What dark force had been kept at bay for so long? And could it truly be stopped? Or had Raoul's actions sealed the fate of Europe forever? As the clock ticked on, Raoul's thoughts turned to his kingdom. His reign was crumbling before him, his family torn apart by the curse. And yet, there was still one final chance, a chance to undo the damage, to close the door that had been opened. But that door would come at a cost. The Countess Edwina's expression softened, a hint of pity in her eyes. "There is a way to end it," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "But it requires the ultimate sacrifice. The crown must be destroyed. But to destroy it, you must offer your life in exchange. You will be the final bearer of the curse, the last to wear it, and you will die in its place." Raoul's breath caught in his throat. He had come to this point seeking immortality, seeking to carve his name into history. But now, it seemed that history would be the very thing to claim him. He had thought the crown would make him eternal, but now he understood. The only thing eternal about the crown was the curse it carried, and the price it demanded. Raoul stood in the great hall, the weight of the cursed crown pressing down on him like never before. His once strong body, now frail and shaken by years of torment, trembled under the realization of the choice he had before him. The crown had given him everything he wanted: power, glory, immortality, but it had taken everything from him in return. His family, his kingdom, his very soul had been consumed by it. Countess Edwina's words echoed in his mind. "You must give your life to destroy the crown." He had sought power for so long, but now it seemed that the true price of that power was his very existence. It was a bitter pill to swallow, for Raoul had never imagined that his ambition would lead to his own demise. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was no other way. His kingdom was already lost, his family shattered, and the curse that had plagued his bloodline could only be ended by his sacrifice. He turned to his daughter, Princess Alara, still in her trance, her unnatural blue eyes glowing with the cursed magic that had overtaken her. The spirit of the crown had possessed her, as it had done to all those who had come before her. It was not just her life at stake, but the lives of countless others. For if the curse was not stopped, it would continue to spread, consuming more and more lives as it had done for centuries. Raoul's heart ached as he looked at his daughter. She had been born into this nightmare, innocent and pure, only to be ensnared by the curse that had claimed their family. He had failed her, failed as a father, failed as a king. And now, the only way to save her, to save Europe from the spreading darkness, was to end his own life. The room was silent, save for the distant howling wind that rattled the castle's ancient windows. Countess Edwina stepped closer to the king, her face grim with sorrow. She placed a hand on his shoulder, offering what little comfort she could. "You do not have to do this, Raoul," she said softly. "There may be another way, but it will not come without sacrifice. You may still have time to seek out the ancient texts, to uncover the hidden truths of the crown. There may be a way to destroy it without your life being forfeit." Raoul shook his head, his eyes filled with resolve. "No, The crown has already claimed too much. It has taken my family, my kingdom. I cannot allow it to take more. If my death is the price to end this curse, then I will pay it. Let this be the final chapter of my reign, and may it bring an end to the suffering." Princess Alara's eyes suddenly snapped open, her voice once again filled with the dark, ancient tone. "Father," she said, her voice now laced with a terrible knowledge, "you cannot destroy the crown. It will not allow it. It is more than an object. It is a force, a living thing that has been with our bloodline for centuries. Even if you die, the curse will live on. It will pass to another. You cannot escape it. No one can." Raoul's heart sank as he heard his daughter's words. It was as if the crown itself had spoken through her, as though it had always known the true extent of its power. His mind raced. If the curse was truly inescapable, if it could not be destroyed even with his sacrifice, then what was the point of all of this? Was there truly no way to rid the world of its influence? Countess Edwina seemed to sense his despair. "There is always a way," she said, her voice more determined than before. "The crown may be indestructible, but there is a way to contain it, to lock it away, where it can do no more harm. We must find the ancient seals, the ones that have been hidden for centuries. If we can uncover them, we can seal the crown away forever. It will never be worn again. But we must act quickly." Raoul turned to the Countess, his eyes burning with newfound hope. Perhaps there was still a chance to save his kingdom, to save his bloodline, but the journey ahead would be perilous. The ancient seals were said to be hidden in the farthest reaches of Europe, buried beneath layers of history and forgotten lore. It would require a journey through perilous lands, a journey fraught with danger, to uncover the seals and prevent the crown from ever being worn again. But as Raoul looked at his daughter, still under the crown's curse, he knew that time was running out. The curse would not wait. The crown would not rest until it had claimed its final victim. "We leave at dawn," Raoul declared, his voice steady. "Prepare the horses. We will find the seals, and we will end this curse, once and for all." The night was long, and the castle, which had once echoed with the sounds of celebration and grandeur, now stood ominously silent. The torches flickered dimly in the hallway as Raoul paced restlessly in his chambers. His mind raced with thoughts of the journey ahead. The seals were hidden in ancient ruins, long forgotten by time, scattered across Europe in places few dared to venture. They were the only hope for ending the curse that had plagued his family for so long. Countess Edwina had given him hope, but that hope was fragile, like a candle in a storm. The crown's curse was a powerful force, and the journey to find the seals would not be without peril. But Raoul had no choice. He could no longer sit idly by, waiting for the curse to consume his kingdom, his people, his bloodline. The dawn would bring a new chapter in his struggle, a chapter that would either end in salvation or in tragedy. As he glanced out of the window, the first light of daybreak touched the horizon. It was a new day, a day that could be his last. The royal court had been informed of Raoul's decision to leave the castle, and preparations for their departure began at once. The horses were readied and supplies were gathered. The journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but there was no turning back now. As Raoul made his way through the corridors toward the stables, he found his daughter, Princess Ilara, standing by the door of her chambers. Her once bright eyes, now clouded with the curse's influence, followed his every movement. She had not spoken since the night before, when the spirit of the crown had spoken through her. Raoul's heart ached as he looked at her. His little girl, the last of his bloodline, was more than just a victim of the crown's power. She was its vessel. "Father," Ilara spoke, her voice soft and hollow. "You don't have to do this. There must be another way. You're not the only one who can bear this burden. I can help you. Let me wear the crown in your place. I will bear the curse. You've already given so much. Don't sacrifice yourself for me." Raoul's heart tightened. The thought of his daughter taking the crown upon her head, of her becoming the next victim of its evil, was unbearable. He knelt before her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Ilara, I cannot let you do that. This curse has already stolen too much from us. I will bear the burden, if only to spare you from the horrors that await." Ilara's eyes filled with tears, her voice cracking. "But I don't want to lose you, Father. I've already lost so much. Please, don't leave me." Raoul's breath caught in his throat. The weight of her words was more than he could bear. He had failed her, but now he would do everything in his power to make things right. He had failed as a king, as a father, but he would not fail her again. "Do not worry, my daughter," Raoul said softly, wiping away her tears. "I will return, and when I do, we will end this curse together." With those words, he stood and turned toward the stables where his horse awaited him. The journey to find the seals had begun. The road ahead was long and fraught with danger. Raoul and Countess Edwina rode together, their horses galloping through the dense forests of France, heading toward the first of the ancient ruins, said to house one of the seals. Their destination lay in the heart of the Pyrenees, a place where the land itself seemed to breathe with an ancient power. It was a place that had once been a kingdom of its own, but now it was little more than a forgotten memory, its ruins standing as silent witnesses to a bygone age. As they journeyed deeper into the mountains, the weather turned. The skies grew dark, and a thick mist began to settle over the landscape. The air was heavy with the weight of centuries of history, and Raoul couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The crown, still resting on his head, pulsed with an energy he could feel even in the depths of the forest. It was as though the curse was aware of their every move, every thought. And yet, Raoul pressed on. They reached the ruins by nightfall. The stone structures, ancient and weathered, loomed over them like the bones of a forgotten world. Countess Edwina led the way through the crumbling passageways, her lantern casting long shadows on the walls. They descended into a hidden chamber deep within the ruins, where an ancient altar stood at the center of the room. "This is where the first seal lies," Edwina said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "It is said to be guarded by the spirits of those who were sacrificed to protect it. They will test us, Raoul. We must be ready." Raoul nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. The air in the chamber was thick with the presence of something ancient and powerful. As he stepped forward, the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble. The crown on his head pulsed again, and a voice, faint and distant, whispered in his mind, "You are too late. The curse cannot be undone." The voice was cold, mocking, as if the crown itself was aware of their every move. But Raoul would not falter. He had come this far, and he would not turn back now. As he reached the altar, the ground suddenly split open, revealing a hidden staircase that led even deeper into the earth. It was then that the spirits appeared, shadows that seemed to move of their own volition, swirling around him, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were the souls of those who had once worn the crown, their lives sacrificed to ensure that the curse would live on. Raoul felt a chill run through him as the spirits whispered in unison. "You cannot stop us. You are nothing but a puppet in the hands of fate." Countess Edwina, undeterred, stepped forward and began to chant in an ancient tongue, her voice rising above the whispers of the spirits. The shadows writhed, their forms twisting and contorting in the air, but they could not stop the incantation. Slowly, the spirits began to dissipate, fading into the ether as the power of the chant grew stronger. Raoul stepped forward, his hands trembling as he placed them on the altar. The seal, hidden beneath the ancient stone, began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. With a final resounding crack, the seal broke, and the room was filled with a blinding light. The curse, the crown, the darkness that had plagued his family for centuries began to dissipate. But just as Raoul thought the battle was won, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. "You have only broken one seal, Raoul. The curse is far from over." Raoul's heart sank as he realized that their journey was far from finished. One seal had been broken, but there were more, and the curse, it seemed, had no intention of letting them go so easily. Raoul stood in the glow of the broken seal, his heart racing as the voice reverberated through the chamber. The air was thick with an energy he could not explain, almost as if the very walls themselves were alive, pressing in on him. The room, once filled with the whispers of vengeful spirits, had fallen silent. But that silence was deafening, and Raoul's mind whirled with the realization that their journey was far from over. The curse had only been momentarily subdued, but it was not destroyed, and the voice that had spoken, deep and unyielding, had made it clear. They were merely scratching the surface. "Countess, we must move quickly," Raoul said, his voice tight with urgency. His hand still rested on the glowing altar where the broken seal had once been. The light had faded, but the remnants of its power lingered in the air like the aftermath of a storm. "One seal has been broken, but we are nowhere near the end." Countess Edwina, who had been chanting softly to herself, nodded grimly. Her expression was one of focus, but beneath her composed exterior, Raoul could sense the unease that gripped her. The crown, still sitting heavy on his brow, pulsed in response to the dark force that lingered in the chamber. It was as if the crown itself knew that its time was drawing near. Its power, its hold on the royal bloodline, was slipping. "You are right," Edwina replied, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "Breaking one seal will not end this. We must find the others. The crown's power is too great. If we are to destroy it, we will need all of the seals, and those are not easy to find. Each one is guarded by trials, some of which have been lost to history." Raoul's mind flashed to the first trial, the spirits, the voice, the power he had felt. It had been nothing compared to what lay ahead. He had felt the weight of his bloodline sins pressing down on him. And now, it seemed that he was being thrust into a game of fate that was far older, far more complex than he had ever imagined. The crown had always been a tool of power, but now it had become something else. An ancient, sentient force that would not relinquish its grip on the royal family without a fight. "Where do we go next?" Raoul asked, his gaze flickering to the Countess, who was already gathering the remnants of their belongings. She glanced toward the broken seal, and then back to him, her eyes narrowing as she considered the next step. "We head east," Edwina said. "There is another seal, buried in the ruins of an ancient abbey in the Carpathian Mountains. The journey will be treacherous, and we will have to cross into lands that have not seen a king's army in centuries. but it is the only place that may hold the answers we need." Raoul nodded, the weight of the crown pressing harder against his skull. The journey would take them through lands unknown to most, through wilderness where few dared to tread. But he could no longer afford hesitation. His family, his kingdom, and perhaps even the world were at stake. They mounted their horses, the sound of hooves echoing in the stillness of the ruins as they set off toward the east. The dark forest surrounding them seemed to close in, its ancient trees stretching high above, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. It was a land untouched by time, a land that held many secrets. And as they rode through the deepening fog, Raoul couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. The journey to the Carpathian Mountains was long and arduous. The terrain grew more treacherous with each passing day, the roads becoming narrow and winding, the path obscured by dense underbrush. As they traveled deeper into the mountains, the atmosphere became more oppressive, the air thick with the scent of moss and damp earth. It was a place steeped in ancient history, where legends of dark magic and lost kingdoms lingered in the shadows. One evening, as they made camp at the foot of the mountains, Raoul sat by the fire, the cursed crown gleaming faintly in the flickering light. Countess Edwina had gone off to gather herbs, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He couldn't shake the image of his daughter, Princess Alara, still under the influence of the curse. It tormented him, gnawing at his resolve. Every step he took on this journey seemed to bring him closer to an inevitable truth. He may never return. The crown's whispers had begun to intensify again, its presence in his mind like a low hum that never stopped. The voices that had haunted him throughout his reign seemed louder now, more insistent, urging him to give in to the power it promised. But Raoul resisted, his will stronger than it had ever been before. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke his concentration. He turned, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword, but it was only Countess Edwina returning to camp. She held a handful of herbs in her hand, her face pale in the moonlight. "Raoul, we must continue," she said urgently, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is no time to waste. The spirits are restless. They are aware of our presence here." Raoul felt a chill run through him. The spirits, the guardians of the seals, were not just figments of myth. They were real, and they were watching them. The crown's curse had awakened something ancient, something that had slumbered for centuries, and now it was stirring once more. The next morning, they began their ascent into the Carpathian Mountains, the air growing thinner as they climbed higher. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees grew twisted, their roots gnarlings in the earth, and the path became less a road and more a trail of faded memories. It was as if the mountains themselves were trying to keep them out, to prevent them from reaching the place where the next seal lay hidden. As they approached the ruins of the abbey, they found the entrance blocked by a vast stone archway, its surface etched with symbols Raoul did not recognize. There was a sense of ancient power here, power that had once been used for great good, but had since been corrupted. The seal, Raoul knew, lay somewhere within the abbey, but they would not enter unchallenged. Countess Edwina stepped forward, her hands raised in a silent gesture of peace. She began to chant, her voice carrying over the wind. The symbols on the stone archway glowed faintly, and Raoul could feel the tension in the air. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the archway split open, revealing the dark interior of the abbey. They had passed the first trial, but the trials they knew would only grow more dangerous from here. The curse was waiting, and they had only just begun. As Raoul and Countess Edwina entered the darkened ruins of the abbey, the air seemed to grow heavier, as if the very walls were pressing in on them. The stone floor beneath their feet was cold and slick with the dampness of centuries of neglect, and the faint scent of decay lingered in the air. The only light came from their lanterns, casting long, eerie shadows on the crumbling walls. It was a place lost to time, forgotten by most, but not by the crown. It had always known where its power lay, where the seals were hidden, and now, it seemed, it was guiding them to its next trial. The abbey's interior was a labyrinth of crumbling pillars and broken arches, the remnants of an ancient structure that had once stood as a place of peace and sanctity. But now, it was a tomb, one that held not only the secrets of the crown, but also the horrors of those who had guarded it. The trial would not be an easy one. Raoul felt the crown's weight growing heavier with each step, as if it sensed the imminent confrontation. "We are close," Edwina whispered, her voice tense. "The next seal is said to be hidden beneath the altar of this abbey. But we must be careful. There are guardians here, ancient protectors bound to the crown's power. They will not let us reach the seal without a fight." Raoul's hand instinctively rested on the hilt of his sword. He had already faced so much: his family, his kingdom, the curse itself. But this was different. The air here was thick with an energy that felt ancient and malevolent, and Raoul could not shake the feeling that they were not alone. They continued deeper into the abbey, their lanterns flickering as they passed through a narrow corridor. The walls were covered with faded frescoes, images of angels, demons, and kings long forgotten. The murals seemed to watch them as they moved, their eyes eerily lifelike in the half-light. As they reached the central hall, Raoul saw it. The altar. It stood at the far end of the chamber, its stone surface cracked and worn with age, and beneath it, a faint glow emanated from the floor. Edwina stopped. "There," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The seal is beneath the altar, but to reach it, we must first pass the trial." Raoul's heart raced. He could feel the pulse of the crown growing stronger, its power thrumming through him. The curse was alive within it, feeding on the very air around them. He stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, guttural growl filled the air, reverberating off the walls of the abbey. From the shadows, figures began to materialize, tall, spectral forms, their faces obscured by hoods and shadows. They were the guardians, souls trapped in eternal servitude to the crown, bound by a curse far older than Raoul's own bloodline. These were not ordinary spirits, but ancient warriors, their eyes glowing with an eerie light, their forms shrouded in mist. "You dare disturb the seal," one of the guardians hissed, its voice echoing with the weight of centuries. "You who have borne the crown of kings, who have caused the blood of innocents to spill. You are not worthy." Raoul drew his sword, its cold steel flashing in the lantern light. The guardians stepped forward, their ghostly forms floating above the ground. They moved with a speed that belied their ethereal nature, their hands raised in ancient, ritualistic gestures. Raoul braced himself for battle, but before he could strike, Countess Edwina raised her hand, chanting words of power. The guardians hesitated, their movements slowing as the air around them thickened with magic. Edwina's voice was steady, but her eyes were filled with concentration. The guardians were bound to the seal, and as long as they remained, it would be impossible to reach the altar. But with the right incantation, the Countess could weaken their grip on this world, enough to allow Raoul to reach the seal. "Raoul, now!" Edwina cried, her voice rising above the chanting of the guardians. Raoul didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the altar, the guardian's eerie growls echoing in his ears as he moved. The crown's presence inside his mind was deafening, urging him forward, urging him to take what he had come for. His every step felt like a battle, his body struggling against the weight of the crown's power. But he pressed on, reaching the altar in a matter of moments. He knelt before it, his sword still gripped in his hand. The glowing light from beneath the stone seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Raoul's heart beat faster as he placed his hand on the altar. The moment his skin touched the cold stone, the light flared brightly, blinding him for a moment. A voice rang out, louder than the growls of the guardians, deeper than any human voice could be. "You are too late," it boomed. "The curse cannot be broken. The crown has been chosen. It will always find its way back to power." Raoul gritted his teeth, his hand tightening around the stone. "I will not let you win," he muttered under his breath. "I will not let my bloodline suffer forever." With a final resolute push, Raoul lifted the stone beneath the altar, revealing the hidden seal. It was a small, intricate disc, etched with symbols Raoul did not recognize. But the moment he touched it, a surge of energy flooded through him. His body felt as though it were on fire, the curse fighting against him, trying to pull him back into its grip. The guardians, sensing the disturbance, began to move again. Raoul could see their forms flickering, their eyes glowing brighter with anger. But before they could reach him, Edwina completed the chant, and the guardians let out an eerie, almost mournful wail. Their forms flickered and dissolved, vanishing back into the ether from which they had come. Raoul stood, the seal now in his hand. He had done it. But as he turned to face Edwina, he saw the look of grim satisfaction on her face, mixed with an unsettling sadness. The curse had been weakened, but the fight was far from over. "We have one seal," Edwina said, her voice heavy. "But we will need the others to truly end this. The crown's power is still too strong. It will follow us. It will try to reclaim what we've taken." Raoul's heart sank. The journey had only just begun, and the crown's dark influence was still very much alive. But there was no turning back now. The cost was too high, and Raoul knew that his soul, his very existence, was now bound to this cursed relic. The journey through the Carpathian Mountains had been a trial, but it was only the beginning of a much darker path that lay ahead. With the first seal in hand, Raoul could feel a shift in the air, as if the balance between life and death, between the living and the ancient powers that controlled the curse, had tipped in his favor. But it was a fragile balance. The crown's malevolent influence was still present, lurking in the shadows, following them like a predatory beast, waiting for its opportunity to strike. Raoul's mind was filled with dread as they made their way back through the mountains. The weight of the seal, a constant reminder of the curse they had yet to break. Each step was heavy, each breath a struggle against the power that gnawed at his very soul. He could feel the crown's whispers again, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing hour. "You are mine," it seemed to say. "There is no escaping me. You will never be free." But Raoul was determined. He could not afford to listen to the crown's taunting voice. His family, his kingdom, and the very fate of Europe depended on his strength, his resolve to continue this impossible journey. The second seal was waiting for them, hidden in a forgotten crypt beneath an ancient castle in the heart of Germany. It was said to be guarded by an ancient order of knights who had sworn to protect the crown and its secrets. But Raoul knew that the greatest trial was not the knights themselves. but the power of the curse that had already claimed so much. The days passed slowly, each one marked by a new struggle. Their journey took them through desolate lands, across forgotten villages, and into forgotten histories. The further they traveled, the more Raoul began to question his own humanity. The crown was changing him, pulling at the fabric of who he was. He could feel the hunger, the thirst for power, rising within him. The curse was insidious, working its way into his thoughts, his desires. One evening, as they set up camp beneath the stars, Edwina turned to him with a grave expression. "Raoul, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. Raoul, lost in his own thoughts, barely registered her words. He had become used to her warnings, used to the tension that seemed to hang between them. But this time, her tone was different. There was something urgent in it, something that made him look up, something that made him listen. "You're changing," Edwina continued. "I can see it. The crown is affecting you more than you realize. You've grown more restless, more desperate. You're not the man you were when we first set out on this journey. The curse is taking hold of you." Raoul stiffened, his jaw tightening. "I'm doing what must be done. I can't think about anything else. I will not fail my family again. I will destroy this curse, no matter what it takes." Edwina's eyes softened, but her concern remained. "I know you're doing this for your family, but you have to understand. The crown has a mind of its own. It will use you to fulfill its own purpose, just as it has used every ruler before you. You cannot let it consume you. You must fight it." Raoul stood, his face a mask of determination. "I will fight it, but I will not stop, not until this curse is over. My family, my bloodline, they are counting on me." The weight of his words hung in the air, but as Raoul gazed into the fire, he knew that Edwina was right. The crown had already taken so much from him. It had taken his sanity, his peace, and now it was threatening to take his very soul. But there was no turning back now. Not when the world was teetering on the edge of darkness. The next morning, they set off again, the road ahead stretching endlessly before them. Their destination was a ruined castle, the seat of an ancient order of knights, known only in the most obscure texts. According to legend, these knights had been entrusted with the task of guarding the second seal, the key to breaking the curse once and for all. But as they drew closer to the castle, Raoul's sense of foreboding grew stronger. It was as if the air itself had thickened, charged with an unnatural energy. When they finally arrived at the castle, the scene was both majestic and haunting. The fortress, though dilapidated and overgrown with ivy, still stood tall against the backdrop of the gray sky. The walls were thick with the passage of time, yet there was an unmistakable sense of power that emanated from within. The castle had once been a place of strength, a seat of power, but now it was a crumbling monument to a forgotten order. As Raoul and Edwina approached the main gates, they were met by the silent, watchful eyes of the knights, the ancient guardians of the seal. They stood motionless, their armored forms casting long shadows across the courtyard. They made no move to stop Raoul and Edwina, but their presence was imposing, their cold gaze following every step. Raoul could feel the crown's pull as they entered the castle's inner sanctum. The whispers were louder now, more insistent. "You are here. You are mine. The seal will not save you. The power is mine to command." The air inside the castle was thick with the remnants of old magic, the very stones vibrating with ancient power. It was here, deep within the castle, that the second seal was hidden. The knights, though silent, were aware of their purpose. They had sworn an oath to protect the seal, and they would stop at nothing to ensure it remained sealed forever. But Raoul had come too far to turn back. He could feel the presence of the seal, its energy thrumming beneath his feet, beckoning him toward it. The closer he got, the more the crown's influence grew, the more it clouded his mind, urging him to claim its power. As they reached the altar where the seal was kept, Raoul's heart raced. But before he could move closer, the knights stepped forward, blocking his path. Their leader, a tall, imposing figure whose face was hidden beneath the dark visor of his helmet, raised his sword in a silent challenge. Raoul drew his own blade, preparing for the confrontation that would come. But as the knights moved forward, something unexpected happened. The leader of the knights spoke, his voice deep and filled with an eerie resonance. "You are not the first to seek this seal, Raoul of Aquitaine. Many have come before you, drawn by the same darkness, but none have succeeded. None have escaped the curse that lies within." Raoul's heart clenched at the sound of his name. The knights knew him, knew his bloodline, and in that moment, he realized that this was not just a battle for the seal, it was a battle for his very soul. The leader of the knights stepped forward, his heavy armor creaking as he moved, the steel of his sword catching the faint light that filtered through the cracks in the castle's walls. His eyes, hidden beneath the shadow of his helmet, seemed to pierce through Raoul with a gaze that held centuries of knowledge, and perhaps centuries of regret. "You are cursed, Raoul," the knight said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The crown has already claimed you. There is no escaping its grasp. Your bloodline was destined for this. The curse runs deeper than you know." Raoul's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, but his heart raced, his thoughts swirling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "No," he thought. "This cannot be my fate. I will not fall to the curse." "I did not come here to hear your riddles," Raoul spat, his voice filled with the bitterness of years of suffering. "I came for the seal. I came to end the curse. Now step aside, or I will make you." The knight remained unmoving, his sword still raised. "You believe you can end the curse?" The knight's voice softened, almost pitying. "You believe that by collecting these seals, you will break free from the crown's power. But the crown has its own purpose, Raoul. It is not just an object, it is a binding force, a key to an ancient power that no man can undo." Raoul's chest tightened, and the whispers of the crown grew louder in his mind. "You cannot win. You cannot stop this. You are mine." For a moment, the crown's influence nearly overtook him, the power it promised stirring something primal within him. The thought of wielding that power, of ending the suffering, of claiming what had always been out of his reach, felt intoxicating. He could feel the pressure of the crown against his skull, urging him to take control. But then, something shifted. A cold resolve washed over him, and he clenched his teeth, pushing the temptation to the back of his mind. He had to remember why he was here. He was not here for power. He was here to save his family, to save Alara. The price of his soul had already been paid, but he would not allow the curse to claim anyone else. "I will not give in," Raoul said, his voice firm. "I came to break the curse, not to serve it." The knight's head tilted slightly, a gesture that almost seemed like a silent acknowledgement of Raoul's determination. But then, without warning, the knight raised his sword and gestured toward the altar. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air around them seemed to grow thicker, charged with the heavy weight of ancient magic. "It is not so simple, Raoul of Aquitaine. The crown cannot be denied. If you seek the seal, You must face the trials that guard it. Only those who are worthy may claim the seal, and only then will the power of the curse be revealed. Raoul stepped forward, his sword drawn, ready for whatever trials lay ahead. But as he moved closer to the altar, something shifted in the room. The temperature dropped, and shadows stretched across the walls, deepening with every passing second. The knights remained motionless, watching with eerie stillness. Suddenly, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the castle. It was as if the very stone beneath their feet had come alive, shaking with ancient power. Raoul's heart pounded in his chest as the air seemed to crackle with energy. From the shadows, spectral figures emerged, an army of ancient warriors, their forms translucent, but their presence undeniable. These were not mere illusions. They were the guardians of the seal, the spirits of those who had died to protect the crown's power. The leader of the knights stepped back slightly, his voice low and filled with warning. "You must face them, Raoul. The trials are not merely tests of strength, they are tests of the soul. Will you remain true to your path, or will the curse consume you, as it has consumed so many before you?" Raoul raised his sword, his body tense with the realization that this was the moment. The trials would not be easy. He had already faced the darkness of the crown's influence, but now he would have to fight not just for the seal, but for his very soul. The first of the spectral warriors lunged at him, its ethereal blade flashing through the air. Raoul swung his sword, the steel clashing with the ghostly figure, but the sword passed right through it, leaving only a trail of mist. The warrior, unfazed, reappeared behind him, striking with a speed Raoul could barely follow. He spun, blocking the attack with the flat of his sword. The phantom knight was relentless, moving with a speed that seemed to defy the laws of reality. But Raoul's resolve did not waver. His body ached with exhaustion, his mind foggy from the crown's influence, but he knew that he could not falter. With a roar, Raoul lashed out, his sword cutting through the air. This time it connected, his blade piercing the spectral warrior's chest, dissipating its form in a burst of mist. But as the warrior vanished, another emerged in its place. The battle was far from over. Countless more phantoms appeared, each one more difficult to defeat than the last. Raoul fought fiercely, his every move driven by the knowledge that the fate of his family and his kingdom depended on his success. But as the fight wore on, the warriors seemed to grow stronger, their attacks more vicious, their power greater. Each blow they struck at him left a lingering mark on his soul, a reminder of the darkness he was facing. Edwina watched from the sidelines, her face etched with concern. She had seen the toll the crown had already taken on Raoul, and now she could see the strain it was placing on him as he battled the guardians. She knew that if Raoul failed here, if he allowed the curse to overtake him, it would be the end, not just for him, but for all of Europe. Raoul's breath came in ragged gasps as he fought on. His sword was slick with sweat, his body battered and bruised, but he could not stop. The crown's whispers grew louder in his mind, urging him to give in, to take what was rightfully his. The promise of ultimate power, of ending the curse forever, was so close he could taste it. But as he faced yet another spectral knight, Raoul's mind cleared. He saw beyond the crown's allure, beyond the power it offered. He saw his daughter, Alara, trapped under the curse's grip, her fate tied to his. He saw his kingdom, once full of life, now decaying under the weight of the curse's influence. With renewed strength, Raoul surged forward, his sword flashing with newfound resolve. He did not fight for power, nor for glory. He fought for his family, for the world he had once known, and for the chance to rid the world of the curse that had poisoned it for so long. With a final, mighty strike, Raoul cleaved through the last of the spectral knights. The room fell silent, the air heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. The trials were over. But as the knights vanished and the echoes of battle faded, Raoul knew that his journey was far from finished. The seal was now within his grasp, but the curse had not been destroyed. It would not be until the final seal was broken, and the crown's power was truly undone. Raoul stepped forward, his body aching with exhaustion, and placed his hand upon the altar. The second seal, glowing with an eerie light, was now his to claim. But as his fingers brushed its surface, a voice filled the air, soft, almost sympathetic. "You have come far, Raoul, but you have not yet reached the end. The greatest trial awaits you." Raoul's heart skipped a beat. The journey was not over. Not yet. Raoul's hand hovered over the second seal, his heart racing, his mind still reeling from the trials he had just faced. The air around him was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if time itself had momentarily stopped. The voice that had spoken echoed in the chamber, soft, yet filled with a terrible certainty. "The greatest trial awaits you." The words reverberated in his chest like a drumbeat. The crown, still seated heavily on his head, pulsed with energy, as though it was aware of the trial to come, eager for what would happen next. Raoul had felt its influence since the moment he had placed it on his brow, and though he had fought against its hold, he knew deep down that he had only begun to understand the depths of the darkness it carried. "Edwina," he said, turning to the Countess, his voice strained with exhaustion. "What is the greatest trial? We have faced the Guardians, we have passed the trials before. What more could there be?" Edwina stepped forward, her expression grave. She had been silent throughout the trials, observing, waiting. Now, with the second seal in their grasp, she seemed even more burdened by the weight of what lay ahead. "I fear it's not a trial that can be fought with swords or strength alone," she said, her voice filled with an unsettling calm. "Raoul, the true trial is within you. The crown has already claimed your soul. The final trial will test not just your physical strength, but your very essence, your spirit. It will force you to confront the darkness within." Raoul's chest tightened as he listened to her words. The crown had already begun to consume him, to warp his thoughts and desires. But could he really face the darkness within? Could he fight the very part of himself that had been tempted by the crown's promises? It was a terrifying thought. "You said that the curse runs deep," Raoul replied, his voice barely a whisper. "What does that mean for me? How do I face something like that?" Edwina placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm but compassionate. "It means, Raoul, that you must come face to face with your greatest fear, your deepest regret. The curse does not only feed on power, it feeds on guilt, on the pain of those who wear the crown. You must confront your own past, your mistakes, and your sins. Only then will you be able to truly break free." The realization hit him like a stone to the chest. His sins, the ones he had buried deep within, the mistakes that had haunted him since the day he first placed the crown on his head. He had always believed he was doing the right thing, that his ambition for power would save his kingdom. But in his desire for immortality and glory, he had sacrificed his family, his kingdom, and his own soul. As Raoul stood there, his mind swirling with these thoughts, The air around him began to change. The temperature dropped, the atmosphere growing heavier, charged with an unnatural energy. The second seal in his hand began to glow brighter, its light pulsing rhythmically, almost as though it were alive. And then, from the darkness, a shadow appeared. It was a figure, tall, cloaked in darkness, with a face hidden beneath a hood. Raoul's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the figure. It was him, his own likeness, but twisted and dark, a version of himself that had been corrupted by the crown. The figure stepped forward, its voice cold and mocking. "So you've come to face your greatest trial, Raoul. You think you can break the curse? You think you can undo what you have done?" Raoul's heart pounded in his chest. The figure before him was not just a shadow, it was a reflection of the man he had become, a manifestation of the guilt and regret that had festered inside him. He knew this moment had been coming, that it was inevitable. The crown had never been just about power. It had been about confronting the darkness within himself. "You are me," Raoul said, his voice trembling. "What are you?" "I am everything you've hidden from, Raoul," the dark figure replied, its voice echoing with malice. "I am the part of you that craves power, that desires to be worshipped, that destroys everything in its path for the sake of ambition. You have always known I was there, hiding deep inside. The crown simply brought me to the surface, but now you must face me or the curse will never be broken." Raoul's grip tightened around the seal, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was not a trial of swords, not a trial of battle. It was a trial of the mind, of the soul. He had to confront the very darkness that had led him down this path. His ambition, his thirst for power, had destroyed everything he had once loved. His family, his kingdom, his very soul had been consumed by it. "I will not let you control me," Raoul said, his voice growing stronger. "I am not the man I was. I can change. I can break free." The dark figure laughed, the sound harsh and chilling. "You can't break free, Raoul. I am part of you. I always have been. You've spent your life denying me, but here I am. And until you accept that part of you, until you accept your own darkness, you will never be free of the curse." Raoul stepped forward, his eyes locked on the dark reflection of himself. The crown's whispers were loud in his ears now, urging him to take the power that was rightfully his, to seize control. But he had already made his decision. He had come this far, not for power, not for glory, but for redemption. He had to face the darkness within himself and accept that he was not invincible, that his ambition had been his downfall. The figure reached out, its hand like a shadow, and Raoul could feel the weight of his past closing in on him. But with a steady breath, Raoul raised the second seal high. The light from the seal blazed, piercing through the darkness, and with it, Raoul felt something shift inside him. The dark figure recoiled, its form flickering, as if it were being pulled away by the light. "You are not me," Raoul whispered, his voice steady. "You are what I was, and I will not be that man anymore." With those words, the darkness shattered, dissolving into the air like smoke. The crown's influence faded, and for the first time in years, Raoul felt a sense of clarity, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The crown's whispers ceased, and the overwhelming urge for power faded into silence. Raoul collapsed to his knees, exhausted but free. The trials had been brutal, but in facing the darkness within himself, he had broken the chains that had bound him. The curse had not been undone, but for the first time, he could see a way forward. Edwina, who had watched the trial unfold, approached slowly, Her expression was one of quiet relief, but there was still a hint of caution in her eyes. She had seen the struggle within him, but now she saw the man Raoul was meant to be. "You have passed the greatest trial, Raoul," she said softly, "but the final seal awaits. The crown's power is not easily undone. We have one last trial ahead." Raoul stood slowly, the weight of the crown still present, but no longer a burden. He had faced his darkness, and now he could face whatever was to come. "The final trial," Raoul murmured. "Let's end this." And so they turned toward the last seal, knowing that the true battle against the curse, against the crown, was still to come. But for the first time in years, Raoul felt hope stirring within him. The darkness would not win, not today. As Raoul and Edwina prepared to face the final trial, the sense of resolve that had gripped Raoul since his confrontation with the shadowy figure of his darker self began to take root. The weight of the crown still pressed upon him, but it no longer felt like a suffocating burden. He had faced the darkness within his soul and emerged stronger. Yet, there was a deep knowing in his chest that the final trial would demand more than just strength of will. It would require the very essence of his being. They journeyed for days toward the final seal, the last obstacle between them and the end of the curse. Their path took them to the northern reaches of Europe, where ancient ruins stood beneath the shadow of an imposing mountain range. The land here was desolate, the air thin and cold, and the winds howled through the jagged rocks like the voices of the damned. Raoul had heard stories of this place, of the ruins of a once great temple that had been abandoned centuries ago. It was said that the last seal was hidden within the depths of the temple, a place where even the bravest had feared to tread. As they approached the entrance to the temple, the air seemed to change once more. The ground beneath their feet grew colder, and a sense of dread filled the air. The very stones of the temple seemed to pulse with an ancient energy. Raoul could feel it deep within him, the crown's power, its pull, calling out to the temple, to the seal that awaited them inside. Edwina, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, turned to him, her face solemn. "Raoul, the final trial is not like the others. This will test your resolve, your ability to let go. You fought the darkness within, but now you must face the truth. The curse doesn't just feed on ambition, it feeds on your fears, your attachments. The final trial is about surrender." Raoul nodded, though he didn't fully understand. He had already sacrificed so much, his family, his kingdom, his very soul. But he was willing to go further. He would face whatever lay ahead, for Alara, for his kingdom, for Europe. There was no turning back now. They stepped into the temple, the air growing colder with each step. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, faded with time, but still full of mystery. Raoul could see glimpses of a forgotten history etched into the stone, visions of kings and queens, of warriors and battles, of sacrifices and triumphs. These were the stories of the people who had once protected the crown, those who had lived and died for it. The weight of their legacy was palpable, and Raoul couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility for what had come before him. As they ventured deeper into the temple, the corridors grew narrower, and the light from their torches seemed to fade. The air was thick with a sense of oppression, as though the temple itself was alive, watching them, judging them. Raoul could feel the presence of the crown's power growing stronger, its whispers louder in his mind, urging him onward, promising him victory if only he would embrace it fully. But he had already made his decision. He would not succumb to its call, not again. At the heart of the temple, they found it, the final seal. It was set into the floor, a circular disc of polished stone, etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as Raoul gazed at them. The seal glowed faintly, its power drawing him closer. But as he stepped forward, something shifted in the air. A figure appeared before him. Another version of himself. But this one was different. This one was older, worn, and his eyes held the weight of 1,000 regrets. This was not just a shadow of his darkness. It was a reflection of his future. A future that had been shaped by his decisions, by his thirst for power, by his unwillingness to let go. "Raoul," the figure spoke, its voice deep and full of sorrow. "You have come far, but you cannot escape the truth. You cannot escape what you have become. The crown has shaped you, has molded you into something you never meant to be. You may have fought the darkness within, but you have yet to confront the truth of who you are." Raoul's heart sank as he looked into the eyes of this future version of himself. It was as if the figure could see into the very depths of his soul, into the pain and guilt he had carried with him since he first put on the crown. It was a painful truth that Raoul had tried to bury, but now it stood before him, undeniable. "You cannot change the past," the figure continued. "You cannot undo the choices you made, the sacrifices you've allowed. The crown will always have a hold on you, and no matter how hard you try, you will never be free." Raoul stood frozen, his sword still gripped tightly in his hand. The figure before him was right. He had made choices that had led him down this path. He had allowed the crown to consume him, to dictate his every action. He had betrayed his family, his kingdom, and now it was too late to undo the damage. But he also knew that the crown had never been just about power. It had been about choice. It had been about his choices. And this was the moment where he could finally make a different choice. "I may not be able to change the past," Raoul said, his voice steady, "but I can choose who I am from here on out. The curse may have shaped me, but it does not define me. I will not let it. I will not be the man you've become." The figure laughed, a sound filled with bitterness. "You think you can walk away from the crown, from the power it offers? You are a fool, Raoul. You will never be free. The curse will follow you, and you will never escape it." But Raoul's resolve only strengthened. "No," he said, his voice clear and strong. "I am not you. I will not let the crown define me. I will break this curse for my family, for my kingdom, for the world. The darkness within me will not win." As he spoke those words, the final seal began to glow brighter, the symbols etched into its surface shifting, changing. The air grew thick with the power of the seal, and Raoul could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on him. But this time, he did not falter. He stepped forward, placing his hand upon the glowing seal. The moment his fingers made contact with the seal, the temple shook. A blinding light erupted from the disc, enveloping Raoul and the figure. The crown on his head pulsed with power, but instead of succumbing to it, Raoul let go. He let go of the need for power, for control. He let go of the ambition that had driven him for so long. The figure of his future self began to fade, its form dissipating like mist in the light. The seal cracked, its glow intensifying before it shattered into 1,000 pieces. The curse that had bound Raoul, his family, and the crown itself began to unravel, its power slowly fading. Raoul fell to his knees, exhausted but free. The crown fell from his head, clattering to the stone floor beside him. For the first time in years, he felt the weight lifted from his soul. The darkness, the curse, it was gone. Edwina knelt beside him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. "It's over," she said softly. "The curse has been broken." Raoul looked up at her, a faint smile on his lips. "It's over," he whispered. "But the price has been high, too high." The temple around them began to crumble, the ancient structure slowly falling apart, as if the very foundation of the curse had been destroyed. As the ruins collapsed, Raoul and Edwina made their way out into the open air, where the sky was beginning to clear. The curse had been broken, but at what cost? And what would come next? For Raoul, the journey was over, but the scars of his past would remain. And as he looked out at the horizon, he knew that the true test of redemption lay not in breaking the curse, but in living with the choices he had made. And for the first time in his life, he felt ready to face that future.